Welcome to this webinar titled Secure and Scalable Backup and Archive with Object Matrix, MatrixStore and Archiware P5. This is David Fox speaking from Archiware in the UK, and as you can see with me, I've got Mark Habberfield from Object Matrix. Morning, Mark.
Morning. Thanks for
good. We thought we'd turn our cameras on just at the beginning so that you can see what we look like and what our backgrounds look like. And then we'll switch off and we'll begin to go through our slides. So hello, and maybe we'll see you later at the questions bit. So I'm going to turn my camera off and proceed to the next slide. So in this webinar, we'll be recording and we'll send everybody that registered a copy of that recording on YouTube, so you can share that with your colleagues if that's useful. And also, we're really keen to get lots of questions from you that we will answer in the final 10 minutes of the webinar. So within the questions box that you can see in the GoToWebinar control panel that you'll have on your screen, please type questions in and we'll read those out and answer them at the end. Simple. So in this webinar, we've got 3/4 of an hour, which we'll divide roughly into 4 pieces. First of all, Mark's going to give you an overview of the Object Matrix products. Followed by me showing you some slides and giving you info broadly on the P5 product set for those that are not familiar with one or the other of those. I imagine a lot of you already know maybe one of these products, but not the other. So you'll fill in the gaps there. And then we're going to switch into a bit of a live demo segment where Mark's going to show you some of the web interfaces that we've been talking around in the Object Matrix sphere. I'll do the same within P5 and we'll do a little bit of live archiving to some cloud storage, and then we'll do a wrap up and take those questions that we're hoping that you're going to ask us at the end. So with that, over to you, Mark, with an overview of your side of things. There's your first slide.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Object Matrix. We are a company from sunny South Wales. We've been working since 2003 when my bosses set up the company. And we are an object storage company. We like to think of ourselves as a partner to our customers. We like to think we're part of the workflow. Myself and my colleagues are often conversing with all of our customers on a regular basis, making sure that they've got new ideas or new features or just want to chat about whether they're doing things the right way. We like to talk to them about these things. We've been focused on the media world quite significantly, and that means that all of our engineers, all of our developers know everything there is to know about media workflows and everything to do with codecs. So when you ring us up, we're not just talking a different language, we're not a generic storage. If you look at our next slide, you'll see a bit of our history out there. Next slide, please, David.
There we go.
Thank you.
Sorry, I think there's a bit of a delay when I hit the next slide button. It takes a while for it to propagate around the world, or to Wales.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this is a bit of our timeline, a bit about us. Back in 2003, my bosses founded the company, but they all actually came from other storage backgrounds. So we've got a massive history in the storage industry. And in 2004, we set up an object storage with an API. Not many people knew what object storages were and APIs were back then, so we put it in the cloud. An online archive in the cloud in 2005 was far too early to market, but we did get a few customers and they were in creative workflows. And it was at that point we decided, right, we're going to focus on the media industry, creative workflows, and we set up file system interfaces and even an integration with Avid. Our Avid integration allows us to back up interplays to the MatrixStore and restore to other places, but we've got lots of Avid workflows we could talk about, but that kind of got us over the hill and got us some of our early media companies. It includes BBC Wales and Gorilla Post House back in 2009, and those two are still customers of ours today. They've got slightly different setups, slightly different workflows, but the main MatrixStore is still the product under the hood. From 2009 onwards, it just grew rapidly. We expanded rapidly into BT, into France. We then went to South America and picked up lots of customers down that way. And then headed over to the US and picked up quite a few major companies over there as well. The beauty of that is we've got customers not only in post, but in news, in sports, in various other things, and even a few banks, because MatrixStore is the secure storage under the hood. In 2020, we brought out our MatrixStore Cloud. Sorry, 2019, we brought out our MatrixStore Cloud and picked up our first customers using that solely for their media storage. Again, it started with the tennis and the rugby guys, the sports, but actually various other companies such as the digital assets companies and the advertising companies, they also joined on board because they saw the value that MatrixStore brings them. On the next slide, we talk about the actual product itself, MatrixStore. So company's Object Matrix, the product is called MatrixStore. Lots of people call it the Object Store. It's actually a media-focused private, hybrid, or cloud platform. It's what we like to call a true object storage, in that the objects are data and metadata. And unlike other object storages, we keep everything together and very fast and very searchable as well. So don't think of it like a slow replacement for various cold archives, but very much in the nearline and sometimes even in the online workflows. We like to think we've got lots of built-in business continuity and disaster recovery. We certainly like to keep our clusters particularly stable and up as much as we can, and very much like to replace legacy archive systems. It's more of an active archive because you've always got fast access to that data, and we can be future-proof as well. We can, like I said, with those customers we've had for 10 years, they've had the same logical cluster, but the hardware underneath it has changed. Hardware's moved on in 10 years, but we can actually remove or decommission older parts of the system and insert new nodes without any downtime, which means that it's the same logical cluster, it's the same data, just the hardware underneath it has changed in a seamless, simple way.
Cool.
The next slide.
Just what is the next slide?
Thank you. What is MatrixStore? It's an S3 compatible object storage platform. That means we've mimicked an S3 interface. You can use MatrixStore as an S3 interface. But actually you can do a lot more than that because we have other interfaces as well. We've got file system interfaces, Samba, NFS. We've got our own file system interface, MatrixStore file system, that mounts as a local drive on Windows, Mac, and Linux. We've got tools, a HSM tool that pushes out to various other platforms, and we've got our Avid integration, which also ties in. But the difference with us is they're all cross-compatible. If you put something in with S3, you can bring it back with Samba. If you put it in with MXFS, we can use it to and from other systems. It's based on commodity hardware.
If I'm using a Mac, I'm just thinking, what's the advantage of using the MXFS mount software versus just making a Samba mount? Do I get better performance, for example?
You do exactly that. So unfortunately, Samba is quite processor heavy, which is means you need some decent CPUs across the board and decent network connectivity. Whereas MXFS can work with less stable networks, and because it's talking to all the nodes, it's quite often a lot faster as well. It uses OS X Fuse on Mac, which means that you've got that direct interface, the direct libraries talking straight to the MatrixStore API and not using the heavy Samba protocols. I'd also say Samba actually gets hacked fairly regularly as well. So, you constantly have to security patch Samba, whereas MXFS is our own product, very, very lightweight and Java interfaced, which means it's particularly secure. So actually, the benefits, security and speed.
And all you've got to do is install a little bit of software on the workstation to allow it to make those mounts.
Yeah, exactly. And they can actually be scripted as well. So they can be auto-mounted. So if you turn the machine off and reboot it, so if you've got a cluster farm of worker machines doing something, reboot the machines, the Mac will come back where it left off and script in it as well, just to run a little script on your desktop, and it all comes back where you want it to be.
And can I use an MXFS client to mount storage directly from a cloud S3 object store?
We need to have a direct pipe, and we need to be low latency. So we'd recommend you need at least gig direct link and less than 5 millisecond connectivity.
So similar to being on a LAN, basically,
But actually,
Yeah.
the S3 interface is getting better and better all the time, and the S3 interface adds an extra layer of security for crossing the internet. And as you know, there's lots of S3 tools now that mount as a local drive as well. So it can be a case of trial and error. Try the first route. If it doesn't work, go along the S3 route.
Okay. Cool. Sorry for my interruptions. Carry on with.
Well, I mean, you just pointed out my new point. Simple to use, intuitive, and familiar interfaces. The idea that you can get to your data. It is the customer's data and metadata, and we want them to be able to get to it. We want them to be able to use their storage, and we want it to be easy for them. Anyone can come on the course, anyone can do our online course, and anyone can understand and get going on MatrixStore within a very short period of time. We do have built-in disaster recovery and business continuity. So because each cluster is based on nodes, and you have a cluster of a minimum of 3 and no unlimited maximum number, you can just keep adding nodes as your business grows. It means that if you've got a node offline, the cluster isn't offline, the data isn't unavailable to you. We do that by keeping multiple copies of the data. We don't do erasure coding, we don't split it up into millions of pieces, and we do that because it means it's faster to get to the data. It means that time to first byte is almost instantaneous because we've got whole objects. And that does actually improve, especially for media workflows, the ability to get to your data and use your data very, very quickly. As I mentioned, scalable, add in nodes anytime you like, keep the same cluster, decommission old ones based on your policies, you decide how it works, and very, very secure. All the usual ACLs, but also checksums. Every read and write transaction within a MatrixStore gets either an Adler 32 or an MD5 checksum. That means you know that data is safe on the MatrixStore, bit for bit perfect every single time. Got full metadata and business rules, so that means we've got the ability to actually decide policies on buckets. We've got built-in trash cans, we've got compliance, you can lock the data. And I missed the built-in smarts, but that comes as part of the metadata. Because the nodes have got a bit of extra ability within them, we extract the metadata for the end user. So if we find anything XMP, pass through Adobe, we find anything to do with camera info or media info, even anything in a CPL file from an IMF package or anything AS11 or AS10, extracted and available to the end user if they need it. And again, through our interfaces and through our API. Low or zero management effort, turn it on, press go, start using it. That's what we like. And then, of course, we will help with all the automation and orchestration you need through products such as Archiware out there. I think the next slide just tells you about our security levels. You know, we've got the standard credentials. You can choose to have the MatrixStore without a file system. You can just use the API or certain interfaces that gives you an added level of protection, making sure the data is safe. Full suite of audits within the MatrixStore. Every admin action is audited. Every delete is audited. You can choose to turn on reads and writes as well. Every node, every appliance has its full firewalls all switched on, so that only certain ports are open. And even our OS is a bespoke distro, really, because we've extracted everything that's unneeded. There are no services running on our nodes that are not needed for the MatrixStore to work. I mentioned compliance, the ability to lock the data for a certain amount of times. That's something the banks have picked up as well. We do have a few banking customers, and they like the compliance, the ability to lock the data for the time period that they decide. No single point of failure. We don't like single points of failure. We like to make sure that cluster's good at all times. And of course, the two-phase deletion with trash cans. No standard ports. We don't use anything standard. We use our own specialist ports for everything, which means you've got to open up the firewalls in your system slightly differently, but you know exactly what traffic is traveling through those ports. It's our traffic. Lastly, two-factor authentication, and very, very soon, I've seen the first copy, and we've got a single sign-on and a multi-factor auth coming through the OpenID protocols in the very, very near future.
Excellent.
I think there's one more slide to say the three different types of deployment. MatrixStore on-prem, we deliver an appliance to the customer. Lots of customers take that because they like to keep it on-prem, and then they can use our systems and our protocols to just punch through one or two ports to allow external access. So you basically got yourself a private cloud, but you host it yourself. You know exactly where the data is. Exactly the same with MatrixStore Cloud. We've got that deployed in the UK. And anyone in the UK and actually other countries, we've got one in the Nordics and a couple in the US who use MatrixStore Cloud in the UK because they've realized the benefits of being able to see their assets and use their assets in a safe system, but pay on a per terabyte basis. And we handle all of the hardware. That's our speciality. You just use it and it's your data and metadata. And then lastly, hybrid. A lot of customers these days want a bit of both. They want some on-prem and some cloud, and we'll mix and match and make sure it's right for you and you're getting what you need to apply by your policies.
Excellent. So I imagine with so many people working remotely, with the hybrid, you can take specific data sets from on-prem storage and have those replicated into cloud so that those are available in a high-speed way from people's home locations and so on.
Yeah, exactly that. And we've actually found some of our larger corporations, they're not allowed to have external workers come onto the internal network unless they've got a corporate laptop. So by having a mix and match, it means their internal users use the corporate MatrixStore, the internal, on their company laptop. But the external workers, the post houses, the deliverers, the cameramen, they can use the MatrixStore Cloud because it's all browser and S3 interfaced to get the data to it. And then a user or some automation decides which bit needs to be in which location.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the introduction, Mark. That was really clear. So I'm going to just pick up and give those that are not familiar with Archiware P5 a quick intro before we run into our demos. So Archiware is a software suite comprising three main modules, which are P5 Backup, P5 Archive, and P5 Synchronize. So the product suite is called P5, and then you purchase the modules that you need. So Backup is a disaster recovery tool, so pretty much standard backup workflow. Archive is really useful in the media and entertainment space where people have a lot of large files sitting on their online storage. Archive is about migrating data to offline storage, which can either be LTO tape or cloud storage, such as the MatrixStore S3 storage. And P5 Synchronize is about replicating data for high availability. In the case of MatrixStore, we can do that between two MatrixStore devices, whether they're on-premise or remotely at different locations. So first of all, I just want to push home a little bit the difference between backup and archive, because this is really important and a lot of our customers kind of need a little bit of education in this area. So backup is kind of what you think it is. It's a copy of your data that you take in order to be able to survive a disaster. And backups generally run every day against all of your data. So you can just leave a backup to sit there. It does its thing. You don't really need to interact with it. It's protecting your entire data set. And everybody needs a backup. And they need probably more than one backup. Well, they definitely need more than one backup so that they can survive one of them not working properly. So contrast that with archive over on the right-hand side, where we're not taking a copy, we're moving data. So the archive is a place that you move usually completed work in the case of kind of media and entertainment users. And the archive allows this completed work to go offline. And in order to select the jobs, the project work that can be archived because it's usually complete, you need to have some kind of a workflow where somebody is selecting the data that's going to be archived, whether that's doing it in a web browser or by moving it into a particular location. That's a task that needs to be undertaken by somebody with the skills to know what can be archived. And pretty much all media and broadcast companies, they need an archive of some sort so that their online storage is managed properly and doesn't fill up too quickly. So that's the difference between backup and archive. And a lot of customers think that buying USB drives from Amazon is going to be fine to take the load off their live storage. So we're here to kind of educate and tell people that this is not a reliable or redundant workflow. It's not properly off-site, so you don't have a remote copy of the data. You can't search it. And generally speaking, it's not a professional solution. So you need to organize your archive in a better way. And that's what P5 Archive is here to do. So P5 Archive and Backup are both able to write to either public cloud storage, including the MatrixStore S3 compatible, because we support any S3 compatible storage, or we support fairly uniquely, we support LTO tape hardware, which is remains a really popular format for archive data, because the cartridges store 18 terabytes of the current LTO9 generation per cartridge, and cost around $100. So you're getting a lot of capacity. Once you've made the investment in the tape library or drive, then you've got an enormous amount of archive capacity for a relatively low incremental cost as you add stuff. So P5 can drive any kind of LTO hardware, from rack-mounted libraries to single Thunderbolt drives that you can just have sitting on your desk. And a couple of illustrative workflows here to show how you might archive from on-prem MatrixStore storage over on the left. So what you would have is another host computer, which could either be a Mac, a Linux, or a Windows operating system. In fact, we support pretty much every operating system there is. And that host will have access to, by mounting storage from the MatrixStore, and it does that across the LAN. And then from there, moving across to the right-hand side, you can either make a fiber channel or SAS connection on that host to some tape hardware to allow you to archive data to tape, or you can use your WAN connection to go up to the MatrixStore cloud, as we're going to illustrate in the live demo. So that's how an archive workflow might fit together. And then I mentioned that we have this product, P5 Synchronize, up on the left there. P5 Synchronize could run directly on the MatrixStore hosts and allow you to just do replication between two MatrixStore hosts that are connected either on a LAN or maybe remotely across a secure wide area network or VPN. And when P5 Synchronize is making a replica, it does so on a scheduled basis, so you can tell it to run every 4 hours or every 24 hours. And it can additionally store previous versions, so it can track versions of files or create entire snapshots of the state of a folder structure on the primary, on the source storage, and it creates those snapshots on the target. Or indeed, you can run P5 on any host, on any operating system, and replicate data to that storage. So,
how does it handle the conflict resolution? Is it quite good for if two assets are being changed simultaneously? Will it actually conflict resolution them?
Well, it's a single directional sync, so it's not keeping both sides the same. So it's basically copying from the left-hand side in the case of the diagram on the screen to the right-hand side. If we're about to overwrite a file which already exists on the target because a newer version has been found on the source, then you can set us up to either overwrite the file or create a folder where we'll keep some number of previous versions of that file, so that if you're looking on that file system, you'll find a versions folder wherever a file is changed, and in that you'll find the last 5 versions of that file. So you've effectively got like an incremental backup available in a file system, so that you can just go pick a previous version. But yeah, it's a replication tool. Doesn't keep both sides synchronized, so that a change on either side gets replicated to the opposite side. That's the way that P5 Synchronize handles things. So this slide is just giving you a little glimpse of the UI, which I'll show you in a live demo shortly. So everything that you archive in P5 or backup is tracked in a database within the P5 installation, and that database is exposed in a UI that looks like this. So we are looking here at a folder that has been archived historically of a bunch of CCTV movie files, and you can see thumbnails. You can play back each of those files, even though that file has been pushed to offline storage in either cloud or tape. So you can have thousands of files sitting across a bunch of tapes in a library, but within this interface, you can see those files, you can search, you can view and search metadata, and you can basically establish what you've got in your archive in some detail before you decide what you need to recover back. Because ultimately, an archive is about keeping stuff for the long term, but also giving you the ability to recover that back to disk should you need to, because you need to repurpose some assets into a new project or whatever reason you might have. So that's what P5 Archive is all about, and makes that really simple with a web interface that pretty much anybody can be shown how to use in an hour or so. So we are now going to flick into our live demo phase. So to begin with, I'm going to hand control over to you, Mark. Let me just find the right place to click in here to make you the presenter. And Mark's going to show us some live object matrix in action. So there you go, Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're both all about the simple interfaces, and today I'm just going to show you a quick look at the MatrixStore. I've remoted into a computer in my office, so I've got a MatrixStore on-prem, and it's made up of 3 nodes. Each node is CPU, a complete RAID controller, and a complete RAID of disk, and we then protect these and make them into a cluster. We can add nodes anytime. One of our customers started with an 8-node system. They built it up to 54 over time, and then they just decommissioned the oldest ones and replaced with a big old 1 petabyte node. So they've now got a few petabytes in just 4 or 5 nodes, whereas they used to have 40 odd because they were all little tiny nodes. Nodes make up a cluster, and a cluster can be broken into spaces. So spaces are where we completely logically divide the cluster up. And this is how MatrixStore Cloud works. We've got a great big cluster in a data center, and we've broken it up into lots of spaces, and you can purchase a space or purchase the use of a space. It means we're looking after all the power, all the rack, all the hardware, making sure your data is safe, and all you've got to worry about is your vaults, your users, and your audits. So I've logged in as an admin here, which means I can see everything on the left. If I was logged in as a space, I would only be able to see my vaults. What are vaults? Vaults are the workspaces, the buckets. I can call them whatever I like. I can set limits on them. I can turn on audits. I can set them to extract that important metadata from the system that we like to have as a bonus. I can set an integrity level, medium being an ADL32, strong being an MD5 checksum on every read and write, the security. Fast is really just for stills. It does a checksum of an ADL32 across the array still. It just does a length checksum and a little bit more on the fast, just for small file performance. But most people leave it in medium, and then they just decide how much of a trash can do they want. They can have it forever, where they've set it exactly like on their laptop, and they've got to come and manually purge it when they feel they want to, or they can set it for a time period just to give themselves any amount of time to recover their data should they need to. Lastly, I'll mention compliance, the ability to lock the data for an amount of time. Now, this is the one feature that gets stuck in time. I can't change it, and if any assets hit this, as an admin, no admin can change it. That asset will have to sit on that MatrixStore vault for 90 days, and at that point we can delete it, and at that point it goes into the trash can as well. So it's to be used with caution, but equally is used quite often by our post houses to secure their rushes for a certain amount of time. Completely locked data within the system.
So if there's a threshold set on how long data is retained, and I try to delete something, I'll just get a message in my OS telling me that I can't because I don't have write access, or does it look like
exactly
it's been deleted?
We'll actually come up with compliance enabled threshold not exceeded is the error message, which is hopefully enough for you to work out something's wrong or something right here and protected for a certain amount of time within the system. And that's it. It's as simple as that to set up a vault. I make someone the cluster admin, and that vault admin, that vault admin can then decide who gets access to it. If I decide my user Archiware can have access to it, I can press the buttons, decide either a basic role, read, write, read, delete, admin, or go into the granularity of it. And like I said, all simple interfaces, all simple user stuff, the ability to add capabilities to do or not do things within MatrixStore's vision application, standard S3 keys that can be generated and used for S3 access, and of course the permission to see vaults that they have access to. Of course, Active Directory integration, we just add the group, directory in and import the groups, and all full audits. So audits, as I said, everything administration is audited, but more importantly, if there's any rule changes or if there's any read-write deletes, I've switched it on. I will see the host that did it, the asset they were working on, and the username, and all exportable, so very easy to interrogate. Now, audits were supplemented a couple of years back by what we call Sense. Sense is a database of analytics. Basically, these nodes are generating lots of data, analytical data. So whether it's the power usage, the CPU usage, the actual hardware, network traffic, etc., we've pushed it all into a simple database which can then be seen by off-the-shelf Grafana or chronograph panels. Of course, once we've got the statistics coming to us, you know, what objects are being used, read, write, and delete, we can start interrogating the system and understanding more about it. And that also includes alerts as well. The ability to say, yeah, one of my vaults is getting a bit full, or one of my storages is getting a bit full. I can see a predicted line of data hitting the system in various ways throughout. So as I said, we've got an S3 interface. We also have what we call MXFS, MatrixStore File System. This is it on Windows, and quite literally you right-click and mount, and that'll pop up as a drive on my computer. Again, Windows, Mac, and Linux, completely scriptable, and even the ability to have an auto-mount version as well. Very simply, click the auto-mount, and that means if it's mounted when I power off the machine and I power it back on, it'll come back to the same place that it picked up.
I see that there's a number of IP addresses listed against each mount point, Mark. Is that like for the different redundant nodes that it will try and connect to as a pool?
Yeah, exactly that. All nodes are accessible. There's no concept of a head node with us. The objects are on. Every node is aware of every object, and every node is aware of every vault. So any node can reply with the read it from here or write it from here side of things, because it's the MatrixStore cluster. So equally, if one of those nodes were offline for some reason, you would still have access to the data because the other nodes can reply for us.
Yeah.
The secret source. We also have our Vision interface as well. This is my Vision on-prem, but I've just punched one port through my network. So I've given it a URL, I've given it an SSL, and I've given it access from the internet. So anybody could go to this, and I could give them a username and password, and they would be able to see my metadata, my assets. As you can see, on my left, I've got my vaults. On the middle, I've got my assets, and on the right, I've got my metadata. Some of this extracted, some of this entered, some of it available to you. Now, Vision is not a database. This is reading the objects live, and that's a big difference. So it'll only work to our MatrixStore. It won't work to anything else, but it gives you a value add of being able to see your assets. We can add proxies to the high-res. So the high-res file is that much, the proxy is that much. The proxy is actually in the same vault. It's just we've tied it together with metadata. Vision understands that metadata, and it allows me to play the assets straight away. As you can see, I can do the kind of standard stuff you'd expect: rename, delete, edit tags, metadata forms, copy, move, add attachments, get expiring links or private links, and download the high-res, the proxy, or even the metadata. The search is particularly useful. You can search all vaults, current folders, extracted metadata, video logs, trash cans, even a fuzzy search. If you're not quite sure how to spell a certain tennis player's surname, like I rarely am, you can use fuzzy search and have a good guess at it within the system. The very recent version of Vision also has video logs as well, ability to tag the timeline within the MatrixStore. We can import from certain file formats, and we can set the videos to be the actual video time format if it's supported. And I think that's just one of the ProReses at the moment. But it's a value add. It's the ability to be able to tag the timeline and say, yeah, this is the start point, this is the end, make a little change on it, hand off to someone else and say, can you take the actions away from this? So it's a nice little tool from there. I'm going to point you towards endpoint Archiware and final archive Archiware, because I've got those two mounted on my my G drive via MXFS. What I've done with my P5 just shows the simplicity. I did this in about an hour yesterday. I set up a synchronization. Oh, I didn't change the password. I should do that, but
it's just timed out on you, I think.
Yeah, I set up a simple sync plan. That sync plan is literally taking a folder on my, I've got a spare SSD on this machine, a folder on my D drive, and I'm copying it to the F drive. Well, the F drive in my case is endpoint Archiware, which means all of my assets that are on my local machine are available to me in my MatrixStore now as well as a complete synchronization. The other thing I did as well, I used the archive function, and I think I did a very, very basic archive where I'm taking my G drive. So that's the mount point called, where are we? The mount point called final archive, taking my G drive and passing it to my S3 endpoint. My S3 endpoint happens to be my MatrixStore cloud. So the beauty of that is I can take any asset from my content and just go, yeah, oh, this is the video. I've finished with this video now. I'm going to just close out the video by moving it to my final archive. That'll go into final archive. Final archive, P5 will pick it up and pass it to my MatrixStore cloud. And on the other side, I can log in and I can see the vault that I've got access to, final archive, and there's my data in there. That means we've got the complete backup option, haven't we? It means that we can just, in the worst case scenario, point any Archiware P5 at it, rebuild it, and we've got access to the data.
Yeah, so everything that we put into the cloud allows us to recover the entire P5 installation back from that cloud, S3 bucket. So all of our configuration, as you can see there, and the data, it all lives together in there.
Yeah. So yeah, final archive is me doing an archive, and the Archiware vault is yourself, David, doing your archive. So I don't know if you want to hand back over and show us more detail of the P5.
I'll show. I'm going to switch ends back to me. So here we go. So back to my browser. Hopefully you can see that. So let's just flick into my other tab here. So I've got another P5 installation. This is a separate one to Mark's, just to show you a little bit more on the archive side. This is actually running in an S3 AWS 3 cloud instance. So I like to do that for demos because it gives me nice fast access to cloud storage rather than running at home here on my domestic internet, which isn't so quick. So just to give you a quick spin around this interface, so you can see we've got tabs at the top for the archive workflow, for synchronize, and for backup. We also have a workstation backup product called Backup to Go that sits in here as well. So simply put, in here we can both browse live file systems. So in addition to having a kind of hot folder interface that Mark just showed us, where you're moving completed projects maybe into a particular share, and then they're automatically being copied and archived from that location. One of the things that you can do in this web interface is you can browse live storage. So we could have some object store storage in here, and we can go and browse a live folder, see live file system, and then manually choose stuff that we wanted to archive in here and trigger an archive directly. So if I'm like urgently needing to free up some space, I could have an archive running here that will get some stuff off to tape or cloud. Now remember that I could have physical LTO tape hardware attached to the host that's running P5, and then I've got the ability to archive data away from the object matrix storage to LTO. Now you actually configure the archiving workflow via something called an archive plan, and I've got a sample one here configured that I've called archive to MatrixStore cloud, and the target storage here is the MatrixStore cloud that I've configured, but it could equally be what we call a pool of LTO tapes, in which case it will go off to LTO. So the configuration within P5 is pretty much the same. The way that you use it is the same regardless of whether you're going to cloud storage or to LTO tape or some combination of both. And what P5 does is every file that you archive gets inserted into what we call an index, which I'll show you in a sec. And the index is a browsable database of all of your archived assets. And that can include previews. So we will generate our own proxies of media files that you're archiving using either FFmpeg, the open source tool, or ImageMagick, which is the one that's used for still images and Photoshop files and so on. So we'll generate previews of each file that we're archiving, and we'll also extract metadata via little scripts that you build in here, which can go and pull out codec information, GPS coordinates, and so on, and also store those in our database. So let's just do some manual archiving of some of those CCTV files. So if I just pick a couple of these files down here, and actually I don't want to archive quite so many files because it'll take a while. So if we do 2, and I hit archive, and I say, yep, I want to archive to MatrixStore cloud, within this interface, you can see the job running. So you'll now see a little spinning arrow indicating that job is live, and that will connect up to the S3 interface for the Object Store Cloud. And you can see we've done 7% of about 265 megabytes, and that will push the data up from this location. I've configured the MatrixStore Cloud storage here, and using the endpoint and the credentials. And this would run quicker if I was to increase the number of parallel upload streams, but I've left that quite low, which is why it doesn't go super fast at the moment, but it's about halfway through. And once that's completed, everything is available to me by browsing in my Object Store Restore location here. So if I just turn that off for a sec. So in here, looks like a file system, but it isn't. It's our database. And if we look inside of CCTV movies, we can see a bunch of AVI files. If I sort by archive date, you can see here's one that was archived just a few moments ago that's still completing. And if I switch on my gallery view, I can see these files, thumbnails. So these AVI files are all represented here by thumbnails. And then if I click into one of these, I can also see a playback of the proxy that we created at the point that this file was archived. Now, Archiware creates proxies purely so you've got a visual representation of the archive file. So we generally recommend that you don't render the entire length of the movie clip to the proxy. For us, we just need a little bit from the beginning so somebody can take a look at it and establish that that is the file that they're looking at before they pull it back to online storage and make a new project out of it. So you can see here, this file has been archived on multiple locations to different, multiple times to different locations. So I could archive it to tape, and then I could go and archive it to cloud. And then within this interface, I can choose which one of those I want to recover it back from. If you're using tape, of course, we entirely automate the operation of the tape library. So we will know which tape and which block on that tape a given file has been archived to, so that when you come to need to recover the file, we will request the tape by name. And if it's not in the library, we'll tell you that you go need to find it. You could even tell P5 which shelf or safe number you put the tape in, so you can go locate it later. So yeah, everything is driven in P5 through the database. You can go search in the database and do a name-based search, or you could say, I'm interested in files that were archived today, which should show us the files that we just archived a couple of minutes ago at 9:40, and so on. So without going into too much detail, P5 gives you that hot folder archive or a manual browse your storage and perform archives to cloud storage or to tape. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the live demo segment because we're running towards the sort of end of our time slot. Just a couple of final slides to say that being purely a software product, you can go grab P5 from Archiware's website there and request a trial key on the same page so that you can have a look at the product. As the UK distributor as well, JPY, always happy to let you to give you some help with that. And Object Matrix is available via object-matrix.com. So
yes, and we can even give you a vision. We can even give you a vision log on with just a vault to try with yourself anytime. And if you want to take up MatrixStore Cloud, we can set that for you within 7 days. And obviously, if we're talking about on-prem, we can have a good conversation to fulfill your workflow needs.
Yeah, and both Archiware and Object Matrix are going to be at the NAB show in about a month, Mark.
We're just finalising details at the moment, but we will be there.
Yeah. So if anybody is heading over to Vegas in April, then they can go and visit the relevant booth and get a full demo and have a bigger conversation about the products. So we do have some questions here. So what I'll do is I'll read them out and then we'll figure out who's best equipped to answer. So George asks, do you work with WAN accelerators, example Bridgeworks, to reduce that need to be on a low latency link, helping customers save costs? So I guess that's one for you, really, Mark, talking about hooking on-prem with cloud.
We're quite agnostic when it comes to the network in that we're very much the customer provides it. You know, we're not going to be your ISP. We're not going to decide what your home broadbands are for your remote workers. We're going to supply MatrixStore. We're going to give you the interfaces. If you've got a private network and you can use a file acceleration tool of some description to make that very low latency, yes, MXFS will work across it. Like I said, we do publish on our web support site all of the latency requirements we have. But yeah, the S3 interface and the Vision interface, completely fine on any, I use it on a 4G quite regularly out there. But yeah, if you're using a file system interface, MXFS or other tools, you do need a low latency line. And how you supply that low latency line is completely up to you.
Yeah, same goes for us really. If you have WAN acceleration, then it can generally get out of the way and just provide you with an endpoint IP that tunnels the stuff through the WAN accelerator. So you would just plumb in that different IP to us, and then we would go through it. We kind of, need the network side of things can be abstracted away using whatever tool you want, and we'll be able to use it. So hopefully that answers your question, George. If not, just type in a follow-up. Mikkel is asking, Mikkel, I should pronounce that better, mounts also as UNC paths, ? So I guess asking if in Windows we can mount MatrixStore as a UNC path. That would suggest using standard Windows file sharing, i.e. SMB, I guess.
Yeah, so we can use SMB and NFS in all systems, but as part of the edit function, there is a mount volume as a network drive. Now, it still takes a drive letter, but it does symbolize it as if it's a network drive. However, you wouldn't then share that out to the rest of the network. We don't really support that. We'd much prefer you use Samba interfaces if you're going to share a vault to the entire network. But we would tie it down for the specific workflow. We'd advise you which is best for you. And it can sometimes be as much as if you need grow-in files from other machines to see grow-in files, we'd recommend Samba. If it's an ingest workflow, we might recommend our DropSpot tool. And if it's just a standard file system side of things, we would just use MXFS. So we'd probably consult with you on exactly what the workflow was before we recommend a specific
Decide
answer.
on the best tech to use to mount the storage. Yeah, makes sense.
Exactly that.
Question from Merrick. How to achieve redundancy across LTO. So I guess what we're talking about with redundancy in LTO would be our cloning feature. So obviously, if you're committing data to LTO as your long-term archive, and you're going to remove that data from your live storage, then it makes no sense just to put that data on a single set of tapes, because if you have a tape failure, then you've lost the data because it's a single point of failure. So we get around single point of failure with tape by having something called cloning. Cloning requires 2 LTO drives. We'll put a tape in each drive in a library usually, and then we'll write the same data to both tapes. So you end up with pairs of tapes that are identical, and then what customers will normally do is leave one of those tapes on premise, so it's available to restore from in the library, and the other one goes off somewhere safe and distant and fireproof, so that you've got a good copy stored elsewhere. So that's the workflow. You can even do that with standalone drives, but you just need 2 in order to create them at the same time. Or you can do running the job twice. If you've got a single drive, you can archive once to your kind of A tapes and archive again to your B tapes, and then separate them once they're full, so that you've got redundancy across tapes. So yeah, that's the way that works. We also, part of that workflow is that if you do have a tape fail, you can introduce the good copy and we'll clone it and make a second copy. So it's all covered off in P5's tape management.
Does that cloning help you take it from LTO 7 to LTO 8, for example?
Yeah, there's a migration feature actually. So if you've got 2 drives, you can highlight an LTO 7 and then migrate it to an LTO 8 or 9 pool, and we'll basically just pick up the blocks from the older LTO gen and write them to the new one, and obviously you'll get a couple of tapes of the old onto each new. Or one of the things that's going to be announced for NAB, which I'm kind of pre-announcing, is there's an addition to P5, which is basically all about migrating data that you've already archived to different locations. So I won't say any more than that, but that's becoming much easier in future P5 product that's about to be spoken about. Last question I've got here unless anybody wants to type a last minute one from Aaron, is hi, what are you using to create the proxy files used in Vision? Thanks. So that's one for you, Mark.
Thank you.
I think you said you can outsource to third-party tools as well as use your internal.
We're not a transcode company. We are a storage company, so we do employ third-party tools to do that. If you had an on-prem, you can use your own transcoders. So whether that's a Telestream Vantage or a Content Agent or a Glueport or even an Ortana Media Group have a lovely tool called Cubics. So that would have to be, well, we would consult with you on-prem how you generate your proxies. When it comes to MatrixStore Cloud, we actually use a third party which incorporates FFmpeg and others, and we just generate the proxies for you. We can pretty much support nearly every codec. I think there's one or two slightly awkward red formats that are hard to do, but we can eventually do them. They just take a little bit longer. So yeah, it's completely agnostic again. We can take the tools that you decide, and provided they can either see our MXFS mount point and generate the proxies through that, and then call a little script to add metadata and tie the metadata together for Vision proxies, or whether it can use our S3 interface is completely up to you. Again, and that'll be part of the workflow, part of the initial setup. But on MatrixStore Cloud, we take care of all of that for you. Anything you throw in there will get generated a proxy as we need it.
Yeah. And just to broaden that question out to P5, we provide built-in FFmpeg and ImageMagick open source tools, but you can, if you have another tool that's needed to create proxies from proprietary codecs, then providing you can install that on the same host that P5 is running on, then you can write a little batch file or shell script and attach that to P5 so that we can use that as well. Okay, and we also, I mean, it's not just video. We have audio customers that are generating playable, low-res versions of audio files so that you can play those back in the browser before you commit to recovering the whole file back from tape or wherever you archived it to. Okay, so what's the time? 52, so we've overrun a little bit there, so apologies for that. But we've reached the end of the questions. That's all we've got to give you for today. So just to say thanks ever so much, Mark, for joining us for this webinar. I think it's been a really informative one.
Yep, thank you for inviting us and working with us to get it going. It's been a great webinar, I think, and we'll certainly.
We're repeating this at 5 p.m. GMT, so for our American friends or people over to the West, we've got another session in case that's useful for anybody to tell somebody else about. We will share a recording. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for attending. Have a good day. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.